Vede Grey leaned against the window and watched a gray owl perched on the fence outside. It regarded him with stern yellow-brown eyes, then lowered its head, spread its wings, and hooted. Vede's expression froze. If he hadn't imagined it, the owl had just dropped a letter into his mailbox. But the Harry Potter books hadn't even been published in his original world, had they? He'd been reborn into this world 11 years ago. From a babbling infant, he'd grown into an 11-year-old, always assuming he had simply been born in Britain in his former life. He had planned out how his life would go. He never expected an owl to deliver mail. Still, if rebirth was possible, maybe magic could exist too. Or it could be a prank. Unsure, Vedi pushed the door open and walked out. The owl followed his movement with its head tilted, its gaze intelligent and intent. He breathed shallowly, opened the mailbox, and pulled out the envelope. His pupils shrank. The envelope bore his full address and Mr. Vedi Grey in neat handwriting. The parchment was unusually thick. The ink was a deep emerald green, a color he'd never seen used before. On the back, a deep red wax seal held a shield crest stamped into it, an H surrounded by 4 animals, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. There was no stamp. Of course, an owl as courier didn't need one. With hands that trembled just a little, Vede broke the seal. At the top of the letter was the heading, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Principal, Albus Dumbledore. He skimmed past the long list of titles and read the main lines. Dear Mr. Grey, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. He read the acceptance over and over, hardly believing it. This was the world of Hogwarts. He heard himself whisper, Is this real? Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry? The owl watched him with bright, clever eyes, preened briefly, tucked one leg up, then turned its head completely around to survey the yard. Vede blinked, startled, then dashed back inside to find proper stationery. He took the best envelope he could find, embossed with gold dust, grabbed a classical quill and fragranced ink, and addressed his reply carefully. Dear Miss Minerva McGonagall, I am honored to receive your letter. If this is not a prank, I would be delighted to attend your school. However, I am unsure how to purchase the school supplies mentioned in the letter, and I would appreciate your guidance. With my sincerest regards, Vede Grey. He let the ink dry, folded the letter, slid it into the envelope, and wrote Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall across the front. Outside, the owl still waited patiently on the fence. Vede held up his reply. This is my answer. Please give it to Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall. The owl reached out with a claw, picked up the envelope, cocked its head, and looked at him as if asking a question. Vede rushed back inside. He grabbed a handful of nuts and hurried out to offer them. The owl glanced down, then swatted them away with a wing and flew off, carrying the letter. Vede watched it go, relieved at least that it hadn't dropped the envelope. Back at the kitchen table, he unfolded the acceptance again and again. Only then did the possibility sink in that he really had been accepted to Hogwarts. But in the 11 years since his rebirth, he had never shown any strange talents. No inexplicable flying, no bending spoons with his mind, no levitating objects. Was there any magic in him at all? Or had the rational, grown-up part of his brain suppressed whatever power lay inside? He clenched his fist and opened it, trying to feel something, anything, nothing. He stared at a teacup on the table and concentrated as hard as he could. Come on, he told himself. With a single soft clink, the teacup wobbled in midair, rolled once across the table, and settled to a stop. Vede stared at his hands, stunned. Magic was real. His heart hammered. A smile leaked across his face. He reached for the phone and dialed the number he knew by heart. Mum, do you believe magic exists? Less than half an hour later, a car screeched to a halt outside. The Greys barely took the time to find the keys before Fiona and Ferdinand burst out of the car and rushed toward the house. Vede stepped onto the porch, and before he could say anything, his mother crushed him in a fierce, tearful hug. Oh my goodness, Vede. You're accepted to Hogwarts! I've waited so long for this day. I thought, she sobbed, laughing and crying at once. Her mascara ran. Ferdinand embraced them both, silent but with eyes glistening. Vede pulled free and demanded, Wait, what do you mean? You knew about Hogwarts? Of course. Fiona dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. My mother, your grandparents, were wizards. I always hoped I'd go to Hogwarts when I was a girl. It's just, Ferdinand guided them into the house and lowered his voice. We should talk inside, so muggles don't see. Once they were sitting down, they told him everything. His maternal grandmother and his grandparents on his other side had all been witches and wizards. The families had been close. But during the war, Fiona and Ferdinand had both been born as squibs, people from magical families who lack magical abilities. With the chaos of the war and with their lack of power confirmed, they were placed with Muggle families to be raised. Years passed. They adapted to Muggle life, but always kept a quiet longing for the magical world. When Veed was born, he showed no signs of magic, so they assumed he was a squib too. To spare him the disappointment they themselves had felt, they kept the truth from him. Fiona laughed and cried as she spoke. I thought you were like us, without magic. I waited and waited. It's July 30th and no letter arrived. I thought. She had to step away and wash her face to get composed. When things calmed, Ferdinand fixed his son with a serious, worried look. Hogwarts, he sighed. Veed, with who you are, whether going to that school is the right thing, I honestly don't know. 2. Shopping in Diagon Alley. What was Veedy Grey's background? Though he descended from wizards, both his parents were squibs, and in the eyes of many true witches and wizards, they might as well have been muggles. Ferdinand had explained in detail the wars of the modern age, Grindelwald's terror, and the later horrors wrought by the Second Dark Lord. The last word they'd had from the wizarding world was that Veed's parents had been killed in the war. V, you've always made your mother and me proud, Ferdinand said seriously. But you must understand, in the wizarding world, people value background first. Pure blood, half-blood, muggle-born, many see those as natural social divisions. About a dozen years ago, the most powerful dark wizard of that time, you know who, pushed blood purity relentlessly. He and his followers murdered muggles and muggle-borns, and even killed purebloods who opposed him. Your mother and I were forced to cut ourselves off completely from the wizarding world then. Even though there's peace now, plenty of wizards still believe in pure blood supremacy. They'll pass that prejudice on to their children. Veedy, I'm worried. Hogwarts might not be the wonderful place you imagine. Veed smiled quietly after listening. Don't worry, Dad. There will be other students with backgrounds like mine. If I have enough classmates on my side, no one will dare trouble me. He hesitated, then added, and wherever I go, strength can smash prejudice. I'll study hard and try to become the best. Ferdinand didn't feel much comfort from that. He worried inwardly. My son has never shown any magic. Maybe his power is only a little stronger than a squib's. How can that be strength? But he kept his doubts to himself to spare Veed's pride. Minerva McGonagall arrived faster than Veed had dared hope. The day after they received the letter, a knock sounded at the gray kitchen door while they were having breakfast. Vede set down his knife and fork and opened it. The moment he saw her, he recognized her, even though he didn't remember the films clearly, and actors' faces hadn't left much of an impression. It wasn't the serious green robes that gave her away, nor the way she carried herself. It was something stranger, a string of handwritten letters hovering above her head. Minerva McGonagall. A new doubt flickered through him. Was this real? Had he not transmigrated into Harry Potter's world, but into a game called Harry Potter? Was he an NPC who'd somehow awakened memories of a past life? Hello, Mr. Gray. McGonagall tried to soften her expression into a smile, but remained unmistakably stern. I am Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress and Professor of Transfiguration at Hogwarts. Veed forced himself back into the moment. Welcome, Professor McGonagall. Please come in for some tea. The Gray couple hurried into the kitchen at the sound of her voice. They stared at the woman who seemed to exude an air of authority and mystery, awed and suddenly at a loss for words. Yes, welcome, Professor. Please come in and sit, Ferdinand stammered, forcing a polite smile while stealing a worried glance at his son, as if afraid some enchantment might befall him. Veedy, however, felt calmer. He had a sense this woman was upright and kind. He kept his eyes level and stepped aside. Professor McGonagall had come with two purposes, to prove the reality of the magical world and persuade the Greys to let Veed attend Hogwarts, and to take Veed shopping for his school supplies. She'd met many Muggle families who refused to believe, suspected her of child abduction, or insisted their children go to Muggle schools. She'd prepared many arguments. These parents didn't question magic so much as worry about the learning environment, so her first task went quickly. Before long, they were at Charing Cross Road. McGonagall led them through the nondescript leaky cauldron to a small, dim back courtyard. It was early. The pub had few customers. A hunchbacked man wiping tables looked up and called, "Good morning, Professor McGonagall." He glanced at the small family in Muggle clothes, focusing on Veedy, who seemed a bit shorter than his parents, and asked casually, "Is this boy a new student at Hogwarts this year?" "Good morning, Tom," McGonagall replied. "I've brought Mr. Gray to buy his school supplies." They walked to the little courtyard at the back of the pub. McGonagall stood by a brick wall, took out her wand, and said to Vade, "Mr. Gray, remember this place. When you want to go into Diagon Alley, you'll need to come through here. 3 up, 2 across." Her wand tapped lightly on a brick. The bricks began to shift as if moved by an invisible hand, rearranging until an archway opened and a rush of noise spilled through. A winding street lay beyond, shops crowding each side, their windows filled with odd and marvelous things. Wizards in robes bargained and passed each other. Children trailed their parents, chattering and chasing one another, filling the lane with life and clamor. "Wow," the Greys breathed. McGonagall led them through the bustling street to Gringotts. Ferdinand had brought pounds to exchange. From a jingling bag, he drew out cash and converted it to 50 galleons. Before they went further, McGonagall reminded them that Muggle paper notes could only be exchanged in limited amounts at Gringotts, though metal coins and items of intrinsic value, gold, jewelry, were unrestricted. With McGonagall's guidance, they bought everything on the Hogwarts list: school robes and uniforms, textbooks, scales, cauldrons, a wand, and finally an owl as a pet. Because Professor McGonagall accompanied them, shopkeepers treated the small family in Muggle clothing with courtesy and respect. Veed's wand was made of aspen with unicorn hair, 12 inches long. Aspen, a symbol of rebirth, struck him as oddly appropriate, almost as if the wand could see through to some secret he couldn't yet name. Chapter 3. Meeting Harry Potter. After their shopping was done, Professor McGonagall saw them to the entrance of Diagon Alley and left. She had another young wizard to guide. The Grey family lingered outside the leaky cauldron, looked at each other, and smiled in the same instant. "Let's find a hotel first," Ferdinand began. "I think the leaky cauldron has rooms upstairs," Fiona suggested. "No. What if there are dangerous people among the wizards? It's safer to stay in a regular hotel." "You're right, Miss Fiona. I remember a nice place nearby that allows pets." "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go." Veed shrugged and carried the owl cage. Ferdinand hoisted a stack of books, while Fiona took the cauldron and other oddments, and they hurried to the hotel to check in. Less than half an hour later, after dropping off their things, they were back outside the leaky cauldron. Stepping inside, the Greys produced luggage and, with a flourish, pulled out wizard robes. Seeing Vade stare, Fiona blinked and hissed, "While you were getting your uniform fitted, I bought ready-made robes. Don't just stand there. There's one for you, too. Go change." The 3 of them changed in a corner. It was summer, and they were in light clothes, so the robes didn't feel bulky. Fiona added a hooded cloak. With the hood up, only a sliver of her chin showed, lending her an air of mystery. In their robes, they blended easily into the dim, secretive atmosphere of the pub. Ferdinand, pretending not to be noticed, ordered lunch like a regular. Waiting for the food, he murmured, "This place looks a bit unsanitary, but I want to try it." Fiona said solemnly. "Me too." "What's the best food in Britain?" Veed grumbled. "Foreign food." When the food arrived, the Greys stared for a long moment. The table was black and greasy. The cutlery looked as if it hadn't been cleaned in ages. At last, Fiona dabbed a piece of bread with her handkerchief and managed a few bites. Ferdinand sipped a little rum. "It's not different," he said. "Tastes worse than the supermarket stuff," Veedy muttered. They were arguing about the quality when the door crashed open and a giant of a man filled the doorway, blotting out the light. The Greys went still. "Oh, my goodness," Ferdinand groaned, instantly moving to shield his wife and son. "Lord save us." The man was enormous and broad-shouldered. He had to duck to squeeze inside. his head nearly brushing the ceiling. His presence dominated the room so completely that most people barely noticed the small boy walking ahead of him. V did notice. He saw the scrawny child, and much to his surprise, glimpsed something strange above the boy's head. Harry Potter. And then, inexplicably, Tom Riddle. Where the Greys felt alarm, the rest of the pub erupted in warmth and cheer. Faces lit up. The landlord brightened and called out, "The usual, Hagrid?" "No, Tom, I'm on Hogwarts business," the giant barked in a voice like gravel. Ferdinand relaxed and wiped his brow. "Did he say Hogwarts?" he whispered. Fiona, leaning forward, asked, "Vede, is he a professor from the school?" By then, the other customers had surged forward, forming a line to shake hands with the tall man and with the small, freckled boy at his side. "Oh, looks like an important visitor," someone laughed. Fiona jumped up, leaving a corner of bread on her plate. "Come on, Ferdy, let's go," she exclaimed. Ferdinand never refused her sudden enthusiasms. He pushed back his chair and joined the others, taking the boy's small hand with a pompous bow. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Potter," he declared, as if he truly knew who Harry was. Harry, surrounded by admirers, found himself pulled from hand to hand, bemused and embarrassed by continual praise. At one point, he met the gaze of the black-haired boy standing back in the crowd, Vede, and felt a little awkward under the other boy's curious stare. Harry was still unaccustomed to being treated like a celebrity. It all felt undeserved, almost stolen. Vede's attention, though, flicked to another newcomer, a pale, nervous-looking young man with a purple scarf wrapped around his head. He edged forward, fidgeting and stammering as though startled by his own boldness. Fiona made room so he could reach Harry and shake the boy's hand. In Vede's vision, that young man carried two names hovering nearly on top of each other, Quirnisquirrell and, strangely, Tom Riddle. After they stepped back, the family gathered their belongings again. "Wizards aren't any different from muggles," Fiona said excitedly. "They chase celebrities, too." "Do you think that boy is a child star in the wizarding world?" she added. "He looks about Vede's age." Ferdinand observed more soberly. "He looks underfed, and his clothes don't fit. Whatever guardians he has don't seem to have treated him well." Fiona waved that off. "Maybe it's a wizarding fashion. Wizards don't seem to understand muggle clothes." "Maybe," Ferdinand said, glancing toward the pale man with the turbaned scarf. "Vede, that young man, he's a professor at Hogwarts, the one with the purple head wrap. You should have gone over and introduced yourself." "I don't think he's very reliable," Vede said, uninterested. Ferdinand considered this and found himself strangely agreeing. The man's stammer and guarded manner didn't inspire confidence. "All right, we've eaten enough," Fiona declared, pushing her plate away despite most of the food remaining. "Let's keep shopping." How could a single quick walk through Diagon Alley possibly satisfy a family so eager to discover every corner of the wizarding world? 4. 9 3/4 station. Returning to Diagon Alley, the crowds were just as lively as they had been that morning, but without the stern Professor McGonagall nearby, the Greys relaxed and the shopping was much more enjoyable. They poked through nearly every shop. Well, except for the one that sold animal organs and eyeballs. The instant they stepped in, a giant rolling eyeball lurched toward them, and Fiona shrieked, sprinting straight back out. Ferdinand, however, bought several exquisite magical items, self-sweeping brooms, small golden birds that flew about, and talking wizard chess pieces. While paying, he repeatedly checked with the shop assistant that none of the items carried any dangerous or harmful magic. Vede spent more than an hour in the bookshop. There were too many books he wanted. Since there was only a month until school and Hogwarts would surely provide more texts, he finally settled on the three he wanted most: basic spells and counterspells, a healing handbook, and ancient runes, a simple introduction. He also bought 2 self-writing quills, though the assistant warned that they were useless for homework. They recorded whatever thoughts crossed the owner's mind onto the parchment, and even the most practiced witch or wizard could accidentally write something embarrassing. Clutching his new books, Vede left and saw his parents sitting on a bench with ice cream from a street vendor. Ferdinand had a golden owl cage on his lap. Inside, a particularly sturdy little owl was perched, cocking its head in curious circles. "Dad, did you buy another owl?" Vede asked. "That's right," Ferdinand said, smiling. You'll need one at school, and if your mother and I want to send you a letter, we'll need to deliver it ourselves. Muggle Post can't reach Hogwarts. We named him General Bud. He's a mighty little fellow. Veed bent down to greet the owl. Hello, General Bud. The owl yawned. Look, I got a little one, too. Fiona leaned forward, opening her palm to reveal a tiny white hamster curled up and remarkably tame. Isn't she adorable? Fiona said, marveling. I swear the animals here must take some kind of intelligence pills. They're so much cleverer than ordinary pets. She's not the least bit afraid of people and seems to understand what I tell her. She's cute, Vade said. But Mom, hamsters are owl food, aren't they? After buying an owl and some owl food on the assistant's advice, Vade had learned that owls mostly eat rodents, small birds, fish, or insects. Carnivores, in short. He inwardly regretted the handful of pine nuts he'd once handed to the school owls. It's all right, Fiona said. Your father will keep a close eye on his owl. Oh, and this is Miss Million. She spoke with mock solemnity. Vade, you should give your owl a name, too. Veed's gaze wandered and happened to fall on a stationery shop whose sign began with the letters EVA, the gilded letters catching the sunlight. Let's call her Ava, he said casually. The Greys lingered in Diagon Alley for days. Ferdinand could now discuss Quidditch matches and the different models of the Nimbus 2000 with enthusiasm. Fiona bought a full set of miniature furniture for Miss Million, enchanted with an auto-cleaning spell, plus tiny robes, hats, and rainbow socks. As first-time parents of a soon-to-be Hogwarts student, they'd also signed a confidentiality agreement with Professor McGonagall on their first day, promising not to tell any Muggles about the wizarding world and to do their part to prevent magical items from leaking into the non-magical world. A month passed in the blink of an eye. On the morning of September 1st, Fiona checked Vade's case one last time, making sure he'd packed everything from nail clippers and ear picks to his autumn and winter clothes. Ferdinand drove him to King's Cross Station. From the Muggle side, the barrier to platform 9 3/4 looked like nothing more than an ordinary dividing wall. Vade pushed his trunk, owl cage balanced on the trolley, and went up to the wall. He turned back to see his parents smiling and waving. He smiled and waved, then took a breath and charged through the wall. Fiona covered her mouth and burst into sudden, soft sobs. Ferdinand wrapped an arm around her and sighed. If only we could go onto the platform to see him off. Don't tell him, Fiona said between sniffles. I don't want Vade to feel sad. Going to school should be a happy thing. Ferdinand patted her shoulder. Don't worry. I asked around a lot these past few days. The wizarding world is peaceful now, and Dumbledore, one of the greatest wizards of his time, is headmaster. Vade will be fine. Excuse me, a timid voice cut in nearby. Ferdinand looked down and recognized the boy before him instantly. You're Harry Potter? He blurted. Yes, I am. Harry self-consciously brushed his hair across his forehead, trying to hide the lightning-shaped scar. He'd forgotten he and this couple had met at the Leaky Cauldron. So many people had shaken his hand that evening, and the pub had been dimly lit. Now, with a hesitant eagerness, he asked, I heard you talking about Hogwarts. I don't know how to get there. See that wall, Ferdinand said. Just push your trunk and go straight through. If you're scared, close your eyes. You won't run into it. That wasn't advice Professor McGonagall had given them. Ferdinand had heard it from his own parents when he was a child. Back then, he hadn't been confirmed as a squib yet, and his parents told him all sorts of little stories about the magical world. Later, they stopped. Oh, all right. Harry sounded doubtful. He watched the couple's faces, kind, encouraging, and, too embarrassed to ask anyone else, he bit his lip and began to push his trunk forward, not very fast. I'll stop if I hit the wall. It's no big deal if they laugh, he thought. He never hit anything. In an instant, his ears filled with the buzz of dozens of voices, and before him appeared a huge, deep red train, the Hogwarts Express, its long line of carriages gleaming on the track and stretching away into the distance. 5. On the train. While Harry fumbled down the crowded corridor dragging his heavy trunk, Vade had already found an empty compartment and settled in. He used the quiet to change early into his school robes and pulled out Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. In the month since he'd started buying Hogwarts books, he'd read nearly all of them, and fantastic beasts had become his favorite. That fondness wasn't only for the subject. The author, Newt Scamander, had even starred in another film series, and the idea of someone who loved magical creatures so much that he kept them in a bewitched trunk made Vede a little envious. A moment later, the compartment door slid open, and a brown-haired girl peered in. She had noticeably large front teeth and looked around before lifting her chin. "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" "No," Vide said, glancing at her teeth and trying to sound casual. "Oh." The girl dragged her trunk inside, sat down, and beamed. "Hello, I'm Hermione Granger." Vede closed his book, offered his hand, and said, "Vede Grey. You're reading Fantastic Beasts? Are you new this year?" "Me too. I've practically got that whole book learned, and all the other textbooks as well." Hermione rattled it off with the proud, eager tone of someone used to doing things by the book. "Oh, I've practiced a few simple spells, and they all worked. Like this, Lumos." A soft pinprick of light glowed at the tip of her wand. "Although I haven't memorized everything, Vede couldn't resist. He drew his own wand and said, "Lumos." Two small, bulb-like lights bobbed in the compartment, reflecting off the glass as if confirming a kinship. Hermione's face lit up, and she whispered, almost reverent, "Isn't it wonderful?" Vede nodded. Hermione's eyes widened as she remembered something, and she hurried on. "Oh, I'm Muggle-born. My family doesn't understand magic at all. These little tricks must be normal for you, right?" "No," Vede answered. "My parents aren't magical either." "Well, then we can help each other at school," Hermione said, visibly relieved and delighted. "I mean, children from wizarding families must have learned a lot from their parents, right? I don't want to be the worst in class." "You don't have to worry about that," Vede chuckled. "Not many people can memorize the textbooks. You might be the only one. That's really impressive, Miss Granger." Hermione lost some of her bravado. "Well, not really. Some of it's difficult. There are spells I didn't dare try at home. The books say mispronouncing them can be dangerous." She flushed. Before she could say more, the compartment door opened again. A round-faced boy stood in the doorway, looking nervous. Excuse me, can I sit here?" "Of course," Hermione said at once. He clumsily set down his trunk and, having sat, began to fidget with his fingers like someone unused to company. Hermione reached out. "Hello, I'm Hermione Granger, and this is Vade Grey. We're both new this year. What's your name?" "Neville," he said shyly. "Neville Longbottom. I'm new too." "Oh, are you from a Muggle family?" Hermione asked, curious. "No, my parents are both wizards," Neville mumbled, head bowed. "So you must know loads of magic?" Hermione pressed. "I've mastered Lumos and Reparo and a few simple ones, but I'm still unsure about Petrificus Totalis. Should it be Petrificus Totalis or Petrificus Totalis?" Neville looked utterly lost. "Petri what?" Hermione blinked, baffled. Neville's face went red, tears brimming. I haven't even got Lumos yet." "Oh," Hermione's disappointment was immediate, but a softer pride crept in. She straightened, determined. "Well, that's okay. I can teach you. We can learn together." Neville looked on the verge of crying. Vede interrupted with a dry, curious note. "Neville, what's moving in your pocket?" Neville glanced down. "Oh, my pet. It likes to hop around." He pulled from his robes a small gray-black toad cradled in his palm. "This is Leifu." Both Vede and Hermione involuntarily leaned back to put some distance between themselves and the squat, slimy creature. The plump toad stretched its legs, and as if deciding the compartment wasn't exciting enough, sprang from Neville's hand and bounded out the open door. Neville hadn't closed it properly when he climbed aboard, and Leifu made for freedom in 2 quick hops. Neville stared at his empty hand for a stunned second before letting out a high cry. "Leifu!" He dashed after the toad, and Vade heard him collide with one of the carriages along the corridor. The compartment fell quiet. Hermione whispered, "The notice said no pets. Well, I presumed no one would actually have a toad as a pet." Vede shrugged inwardly. He could appreciate a gold or emerald toad. Those could be rather pretty, but a dull gray, warded thing was hardly lovable. Still, Neville clearly cared for it. After a long while, Neville returned, eyes red, wiping his cheeks. "I couldn't find it. No one saw it." He began to sob again. "It's a closed train," Vade said. "It'll turn up when we get off." That didn't do much for Neville. Seeing how upset he was, Hermione sighed and stood. "I'll go with you and help look." She looked at Vede to see if he wanted to come. Veed shook his head and watched Hermione and Neville leave. The compartment, previously animated, was suddenly quiet. Outside the window, the rolling hills slid past in a patchwork of green. Veed knew that if he'd gone after them, he would have run straight into Harry and Ron, and 11-year-old boys made fast friends. The Golden Trio would have been a quartet in no time. He thought about it for a long while and felt no need to cling to the main cast. He wasn't drawn by childish adventures about saving the world this school year. Magic itself was enough of an attraction. Hermione and Neville probably searched the whole train, but they couldn't find the escaped Toad. Neville had recovered a little from the shock of losing his pet, or perhaps not recovered exactly. He was still downcast, but at least he wasn't crying anymore. When Hermione entered their compartment, she was surprised to see a pile of snacks on the table. "What are these?" she asked. "A woman selling food came through," Vidi said, holding up his purchases. "I bought a lot: strawberry jellies, chocolate frogs, pumpkin tarts, cauldron cakes, and sherbet. Let's eat." "Oh, Neville, do you want to try this peppermint toad?" Neville took it, muttering something under his breath. "Leifu," then bit into it. His face lit up. "This is delicious." Hermione didn't decline either. She sat down and took a piece of cake. "Thanks, I was starving. By the way, you won't believe it. Harry Potter is in the compartment less than 10 meters from us. Do you know Harry Potter?" "Of course," Vade said, unwrapping a chocolate frog. "His name's in the record of important magical events of the 20th century, but it's better not to bother him. He lost his parents the night he became famous. If it were me, I wouldn't want that kind of attention." Hermione went pale. "You're right. I hadn't thought of that." Neville lowered his head, his fingers tightening around the peppermint toad. The Potters' sacrifice and the honor attached to it were famous, but fewer people knew the darker things. That Death Eaters, in their search for the missing Lord Voldemort, had captured and tortured Neville's parents until they went mad. The boy kept those horrors to himself, tucked away behind a quiet face. They ate the snacks together. Vidi had expected much of it to be left over, but the train rumbled on, and by the time they'd finished, darkness had fallen, and they still hadn't reached Hogwarts. The vendor had disappeared, and they had no proper dinner. "Isn't Hogwarts in Britain?" Hermione said indignantly and stood up. "I'm going to the front of the train to ask the driver when we'll arrive." "Let's go together," Vita said. He was curious about the driver, too. After all, who did that job only a handful of times a year? Neville followed as well, still hoping to spot his toad. The driver was an unremarkable, brown-haired man with a full beard, smoking a pipe. Faced with the three young wizards' questions, he chuckled. "Don't worry, we'll be there soon. You'll have dinner at Hogwarts." Hermione went back to the compartment, satisfied. As they passed by other carriages, Veed glanced in. He didn't recognize most faces, though the Weasley twins' compartment was impossible to miss. Laughter and cheers spilled out as they carried on some prank. Before they reached their own door, screams echoed through the corridor and 3 older students ran by, stumbling. One blonde boy even shoved Neville aside. "Get out of the way! Don't block the path!" he shouted. "Hey!" Hermione stamped her foot. "How rude!" Veed helped Neville steady himself. "Thanks," Neville said gratefully. "You go change into your robes first," Veed told Hermione. "We'll wait outside." She swallowed her anger and nodded, then went inside and changed quickly. Neville packed his things next. Just as the 3 of them finished stowing their trunks, the driver's voice boomed down the corridor. 5 minutes until arrival at Hogwarts. Please leave your luggage on the train. We will deliver it to the school for you." The train slowed and pulled into the station. Hundreds of students poured out like bees from a hive, flooding the narrow, dim platform. Vadi, Hermione, and Neville followed Hagrid, who stood far ahead, a giant figure holding a lamp, through the crowd. Older students drifted away in other directions, but no one dared question Hagrid's orders. First years, follow me. Watch your step," he bellowed. They threaded a path through the castle grounds and a dark stretch of trees until at last a great castle rose before them. Countless windows glowed against the night, and the light shimmered on the black, glassy surface of the lake. "Wow!" The first years breathed in unison. Hagrid shepherded them to small boats, and they crossed the Black Lake. On one of the boats, Hagrid even found Neville's toad, Neville burst into joy and scooped his pet up. When they reached the castle, Hagrid rapped the enormous door 3 times. It swung open, and Professor McGonagall stood before them, stern and composed. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said. The sorting ceremony began. Hogwarts had 4 houses: Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw, and the sorting hat would place each student by judging their talents and qualities. Vade had known the outline of all this from stories and the things he remembered of the books and films, though having transmigrated to this world 11 years earlier, he'd let many details slip. Once he realized where he was, he'd tried to recall the important points and had even made mental notes. Before going up to be sorted, Vade had thought carefully about where he might fit. The sorting hat considered ability, certainly, but it also respected the students' wishes. Slytherin was out, his parents weren't wizards, and Slytherin's reputation for valuing bloodlines and family connections made him fear being looked down on. Gryffindor didn't appeal either. With Harry Potter in that house, Gryffindor seemed to draw every storm of attention. Vede remembered Gryffindors as impulsive and liable to follow mob opinions, sometimes turning on outsiders like Harry. It left him with a bad impression. Ravenclaw wasn't ideal either. He recalled instances of ridicule there, the sort of ostracism that had happened to Luna Lovegood. Hufflepuff, on the other hand, felt different. Its students were honest, kind, and loyal. They might be ordinary in some ways, but Vade valued sincerity over prestige. Even if Hufflepuff earned a reputation for being dull, he wasn't about to change himself to fit a label. After the Sorting Hat's song, Professor McGonagall read from a long list. Students went up one by one. Some were sorted in a flash. Others hesitated under the hat's whispers. "Hermione Granger," McGonagall called. Hermione ran forward and put on the hat. A moment later it announced, "Gryffindor," and the Gryffindor table erupted in applause. Then came the next name, Vede Grey. 7. Sorting, Vede walked forward, put the sorting hat on his head and thought, "Hufflepuff! Hufflepuff! I want Hufflepuff!" "Hufflepuff?" A faint voice inside the hat replied. "Oh, perhaps you didn't hear my song. It's all right, I'll sing a verse just for you, those who are just and loyal." He felt the hat's music again. It sang on. "Hufflepuffs are steady and true." "Okay, enough singing," he thought. The hat continued, "Not afraid of hard work." "That's a bit much. You're a little loud," he thought. The sorting hat rustled. "Although Hufflepuff never refuses any student who longs for Hogwarts, there's a place more suited to you. People always have trouble seeing themselves, don't they?" "I'm not going to Slytherin," Vade thought, panic flaring for a second. "Of course it's," the hat declared, "Ravenclaw." A ripple of restrained applause came from the second row of tables on the left. Vade breathed a sigh of relief, removed the hat, and walked toward the long table draped in teal and blue. "Stiff old thing," he thought. "What if I'm not righteous and honest and hard-working enough? I just like to be friends with people like that. Doesn't that count?" Several Ravenclaws stood to greet him. The boy leading them offered his hand. "Welcome to Ravenclaw. I'm the prefect, Westmore." Another boy leaned in. "You're Vede Grey? Then you're perfect for our house." "What do you mean?" Vede asked. "Oh, Benson, don't tell that joke," West said, exasperated. Benson grinned and winked. "Because our house ghost is called the Grey Lady." Vede stared. After a few seconds, he said slowly, "Oh, I see." Benson fell silent. West rapped his friend on the head. "I told you not to be like the Weasley twins. There's no comedy gene in you." Benson slumped back as if defeated. Vede found the expression oddly amusing. He sat down and looked around. He didn't need introductions. In his head, everyone had a name attached to them. But he realized he had almost no real impressions of the Ravenclaws. They were rarely mentioned in the things he'd read. The one exception was a very pretty, black-haired girl a few seats diagonally across, Cho Chang, who was watching the sorting with interest and hadn't noticed him. At the staff table, all the faces matched his memory. Albus Dumbledore, with his silver hair and long beard, the sallow, greasy-haired Severus Snape, the tiny Phileas Flitwick who looked like a child, the eccentric Sybil Trelawney, the round Professor Sprout, and Professor Quirrell, Tom Riddle, with a face in front and a face in back, as strange as ever. Sitting at the Ravenclaw table, Vede felt almost invisible. The professors paid him no more attention than usual. The sorting went on. "Michael Corner, Ravenclaw." A blond boy named Anthony clapped and greeted the table, followed soon by Michael Corner with long, curly black hair, who took the seat next to Vede. Padma Patil arrived shortly after. Her twin Parvati had been sorted into Gryffindor. Only about 10 new students joined Ravenclaw in total. The newcomers studied their new housemates with a mix of apprehension and excitement, until a name rang out across the hall: Harry Potter! The great hall fell silent for a breath, then filled with whispers. Potter? Harry Potter! Even the usually aloof Ravenclaws craned their necks as the black-haired boy walked toward the hat. From Gryffindor to Slytherin, from Dumbledore to Filch standing by the door, everyone watched as the little boy pulled the sorting hat over most of his face. The murmurs died down. Finally, Gryffindor! The hat cried, and the hall exploded into cheers and applause. The Gryffindors were loudest, but even many Ravenclaws clapped, more applause than most new students received. I knew he'd be in Gryffindor, Benson told West earnestly. Where else would he go? Shut up, Benson, West scolded. 2 months ago, you said Harry Potter was just a character in a book and didn't exist. By the time the last new student was placed in Slytherin, Professor McGonagall had taken the sorting hat away and Dumbledore rose, spreading his arms. Welcome, he said. Welcome, everyone, to Hogwarts for a new school year. Before the feast begins, I'd like to say a few words, and they are nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, thank you. Vede applauded with everyone else. What did he mean? Michael, sitting beside him, asked. I don't know, Vede admitted. Then why clap? Michael asked, raising an eyebrow. Short speech, Vede replied. Deserves applause. Michael thought a moment and shrugged. You're right. Warm applause and cheers settled over the hall. In an instant, the empty tables groaned under a sudden abundance of food: roast beef, lamb chops, chips, mashed potatoes, and more. Vegetables were sparse, but the aroma made up for it. The students, ravenous after the journey, dug in. When the main courses were nearly gone, platters of dessert appeared. With full stomachs and lighter appetites, the students had time to chat. New students spoke mostly about family and bloodlines. I come from a pure-blood family, a boy named Stephen said. My mother was in Ravenclaw. My father was in Gryffindor. I've already read all the school textbooks at home. What about you, Vede? Someone asked. Neither of my parents can do magic, Vede answered frankly. So magic's new for you? Stephen said, sympathetic. You'll have to work harder. I will, Vede said, smiling. But whether you're pure blood or muggle-born doesn't really matter. Like my family, Michael added. My father's a wizard, but my mother runs the house. She's the clever one. Because Vede Grey's surname began with G, he was sorted after Hermione Granger and before Harry Potter. 8. A letter. Dear Mom and Dad. Although I only just left home, I already miss you. I hope you are healthy and happy. We arrived at Hogwarts yesterday on a deep red steam train. The school is a magnificent castle, surrounded by meadows, woods, and lakes. The morning scenery here is absolutely charming. We got to the school in the evening, and the first thing was the sorting. You probably know that Hogwarts is divided into 4 houses: the brave, chivalrous Gryffindor, the upright, loyal Hufflepuff, the wise, knowledgeable Ravenclaw, and the ambitious Slytherin. I paused while writing this. I keep thinking about the sorting hat. The other 3 houses seem to prize character, but Ravenclaw cares more about ability. So you get smart, brave people in Gryffindor. Dumbledore and Hermione come to mind. Smart, loyal people in Hufflepuff, like Scamander and Cedric. And smart, ambitious people in Slytherin, like Voldemort and Snape. But what about the smart people who end up in Ravenclaw? They're clever and quick, but cleverness alone isn't always enough. People who are smart often avoid unnecessary risks and choose the safest, easiest path. To achieve anything, you need more than intellect. You need drive, courage, perseverance, ambition. Smart people who live in their own heads can come off as odd to others, which is why Ravenclaw tends to be the least noticed house. Most Ravenclaws we actually meet in the stories are a bit eccentric. Cho Chang is a rare exception. The sorting hat told me I belonged in Ravenclaw, which I take as a compliment to my intellect. I intend to learn as much as possible during my 7 years here. I've been told there is no collection richer than Hogwarts' library. The wizarding world is oddly short-sighted about public access to books. There aren't public libraries like in the Muggle world. Valuable books are either locked away in the school or kept in private family studies. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore is a strange, wonderful man. He has long, silver-white hair and beard and looks exactly like the mysterious wizard you'd imagine, like a living Merlin. Can you picture it? His speech at the opening feast was simply nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak. Nobody knows what that means, but it was far better than those long, boring speeches. And as soon as he finished speaking, all sorts of delicious food appeared on the tables. Yes, they appeared by magic, and we were starving by then. He's eccentric, but humorous, kind, and gentle. Everyone says he's the greatest wizard of our time, and that because he's here, Hogwarts is the safest place in the world. So don't worry about me. Students don't go around cursing each other for no reason. We're just like ordinary schoolchildren. My house, Ravenclaw, has its own tower on the west side of the castle. After dinner, the prefect led us there. You have to answer the knocker's question correctly to get into the common room. The common room is a large circular room with a deep blue domed ceiling painted with stars. The thick carpet is star-patterned too, quiet and elegant. Tall arched windows with bronze silk curtains look out toward distant hills and the Quidditch pitch. The dormitories are in a corner tower next to the main tower. Getting back to the dorm means a lot of stairs. The older students say the castle's staircases are usually friendlier to Ravenclaws. They don't wander about as much for us, and sometimes even create shortcuts, having the climb. Maybe because Ravenclaw's founder designed the ever-changing staircases. Ravenclaw has the fewest students of the four houses. Dorms are normally doubles, but there was one extra boy this year, and I seized the chance to apply right away, and I was lucky enough to get a single room. My dorm has a warm bed, wardrobe, desk, bookshelf, and a private washroom. All daily necessities are provided. We don't have to do laundry or clean our rooms. There are invisible helpers in the castle who tidy everything. My suitcase was probably delivered up the spiral stairs by them too. I'm glad I didn't have to carry it myself. The students in my house are easy to get along with. Prefect West takes good care of the new students. He waited in the common room early this morning to take us to the Great Hall for breakfast and handed out our schedules. The coursework looks pretty relaxed, which is a relief. After breakfast, Prefect West toured us around the school, showing where each class is, which areas are off limits, and where to find the library, the infirmary, and the Quidditch pitch. We'll be having flying class soon. I'll ride a broom for the first time. It's exciting. I never imagined humans could soar like birds. I'll follow the professor's instructions and be careful. Hogwarts is a truly wonderful school, and I really like it here. Love, Vede Grey. Vede had lived 2 lives, and he wasn't as carefree as an ordinary child. He knew how worried loving parents would be when their child left home. Before classes started, he used a little free time to write down everything that had happened since he arrived, and even drew a simple map of the school to enclose with the letter. After finishing, he reviewed it and changed his description of Slytherin from ambitious to shrewd and proud. He didn't mean to praise Slytherin. He just didn't want his parents to find any hint of inter-house conflict and start to worry. The Greys' image of the wizarding world was still stuck in the days when the Dark Lord ruled, and after Vade received his Hogwarts letter, they'd been secretly feeling guilty and afraid he might be a squib. Vade wanted to reassure them. The war is over. Blood purity isn't the way of things now, and my background won't be an obstacle. You're not a burden to me. He was always grateful to be their child. 9. Potions. The first-year curriculum at Hogwarts was fairly relaxed. For example, on Monday, Vede only had 2 consecutive potions lessons in the morning. After breakfast, a group of Ravenclaw first-years walked down toward the dungeon classroom together, and as the passage grew colder, their faces turned pale. I heard Professor Snape, who teaches, "This is the head of Slytherin," Michael, walking beside Vede, said to ease the tension. "You noticed him at the sorting, right? The one with black hair and that hooked nose." "Of course," Padma replied. "We'd better not get on his bad side." They reached the potions classroom in silence. Rows of glass jars containing odd animal specimens lined the walls. Some of the more timid students looked as if they might cry and sat as far from the jars as possible. Vade chose a corner seat. He wasn't afraid of dead specimens, but he didn't want to be implicated by someone else's careless mistake. Hufflepuff groups trickled in soon after, their nervousness matching the Ravenclaws. The early arriving Ravenclaws had already taken the best spots, so the Hufflepuffs spread to the edges. Two of them ended up near Vita's corner. "Hello, I'm Theo Mancini. This is Ryan Carlo," the brown-haired Hufflepuff said, introducing themselves. "May I ask who you are?" "Vide Gray." "Vide," Theo repeated with interest. "Do you know anything about—" "Theo, shut up," Ryan interrupted. "Professor's here." Before he finished the sentence, the classroom door slammed open. A man in black robes strode in. His face was cold and his presence intimidating. Many students instinctively hunched their shoulders and the room fell silent. Snape scanned them, pulled out his register, and began calling names. Noticing everyone was present for the first lesson, his expression softened ever so slightly. "Potions is an exact subject," he said in a low voice that cut through the silence. "It requires strict procedure and precise proportions. If anyone presumes to alter a potion's recipe, or arbitrarily adds or subtracts ingredients, or foolishly waves a wand in an attempt to cover a mistake—" His eyes swept the cowering first years, lingering on the Hufflepuffs in yellow and black ties. "I will make them understand the full consequences of a failed potion." Theo swallowed, as if the words were aimed at him. Vide felt a prickling unease. He had chosen the corner to avoid trouble, and now it seemed a landmine lay at his elbow. As if he had sensors for it, Snape immediately picked up on the nervous Hufflepuff. Without glancing at the register, he said, "Theo Mancini." "Yes!" Theo jumped up, nearly knocking over his cauldron. "Yes, Professor." "When brewing a boil-curing potion, how should slugs be prepared?" Snape asked. 7 or 8 hands shot up, mostly Ravenclaws. Good news, the question was right out of the first chapter of the textbook. Bad news, Theo hadn't read ahead. He stammered, I don't know, sir." "Sit down," Snape snapped. "Not preparing the text." Hufflepuff 1 point. "Vide Gray," he called on the Ravenclaw beside Theo. Vide stood at once. "Boil for 5 minutes, sir." "Correct." Snape nodded, but awarded no points to Ravenclaw. He continued, "Michael Corner, what is nettle used for?" "It can treat inflammation, stop hair loss, and it can also staunch bleeding," Michael said, faltering. "Not bad." Snape inclined his head and gestured for him to sit. "Hannah Abbott, when are porcupine quills to be added?" A blonde girl rose with tears in her eyes, as though he could say one more harsh thing and she would break. Snape shifted and called another name. "Ryan Carlo?" Ryan had been flicking through the textbook when the questions began. This particular detail was emphasized. After extinguishing the fire, "Professor," he answered as calmly as he could. Snape glanced down at his open book. "I expect you to learn this before you come to class, not cram while we're working and pray for Merlin's mercy." Ryan sat with his lips pressed tight. Theo patted his arm. Snape wasn't singling anyone out. The barrage of questions was a wake-up call for everyone. By the time he began the formal instruction, Hufflepuff had already lost 13 points and Ravenclaw 5. Silence settled as Snape explained how to prepare the boil-curing potion. He paired the students by where they sat then, with a flick of his wand, wrote detailed steps on the blackboard. Everyone hurriedly took out quills and copied them down. Vide noticed the blackboard instructions differed subtly from the textbook. If they followed the book exactly, they might not get results that satisfied Snape. "Sorry," Theo whispered to Vide, who had been assigned to him by seating. "I didn't preview the text, but I'll try not to slow you down." Theo's amber eyes were earnest, and Vide's initial annoyance about being paired with a poor student eased. "It's okay," Vide said. "The boil-curing potion is simple enough. If we follow the steps carefully, we should be fine." Theo retrieved the ingredients from a nearby shelf. Vade weighed them on a scale and slid the snake fangs toward Theo with a small knife. "You handle the prep, I'll do the brewing." "Okay." Theo put on dragonhide gloves and ground the snake fangs into powder in a mortar. Vade pinched up 4 slugs with tweezers and placed them in the cauldron to steam, controlling the heat with his wand. After a few minutes, he removed the darkened slugs, set them aside, changed the water, reheated the potion, and ran through the steps in his head again. Theo had already finished the fang powder and was cutting dried nettle. Vide was a little surprised. Though clumsy at first glance, Theo was methodical. His processed powder was fine and even, without any coarse particles or impurities. Maybe this partner wouldn't be so bad after all. The water in the cauldron steamed quickly. Veed sprinkled in powdered snake fangs and nettles, stirred 2 turns clockwise, then 3 counterclockwise. The nettle bits melted like ice. Suddenly a scream cut across the classroom, and a thick green smoke hissed out. Several students cried out in pain as failed potions seared their skin. Theo froze. "What's happening?" "Don't get distracted." V didn't even look up. He counted 10 seconds in his head and added the slugs. "Theo, move the cauldron." Theo obeyed at once, still wearing his dragonhide gloves, while Veed waited another moment, added 2 porcupine quills, then stirred 5 turns clockwise. The potion changed before their eyes. The revolting brownish-green liquid turned into a bright jelly-like green, the exact color book said a successful brew should be. Theo stared at the cauldron, then at the book. "It worked. Veed, you did it on the first try." At the far side of the classroom, Professor Snape, who had just extinguished another potion mishap and reduced a few students to tears in the process, heard the commotion and stalked over. He bent his head and examined the cauldron with his customary scowl. Under Theo's anxious gaze, he finally conceded. "Not bad. It meets the standard. 1 point for each of you." On the way out of class, Theo was still buzzing. They say Snape hardly gives points to other houses. Getting those back is great. He told Ryan the whole story, and we even had time to preview the cough potion for next week. "If Snape asks me a question next time, I won't be left speechless." Ryan grinned. "Our group's potion was always slightly off. It had this odd smell. Maybe we didn't brew it long enough." "Hey, Veed," Michael called as he caught up with them. "How did you get that pale green?" "I followed Snape exactly, but mine was darker." "If your method was right, it's the materials," Veed said, nodding toward Theo. "Theo prepared his ingredients perfectly. Our mixture had almost no impurities." Theo, unused to praise, blushed and changed the subject. "Do you guys have plans this afternoon? How about the library? We should get started on that essay." Before class, Snape had assigned an essay on the boil cure potion, at least 6 inches, about 15 centimeters, of text. Michael groaned. "It's not due tomorrow. Friday, right? Why hurry?" "I'm going to the library." Veedy shrugged. 6 inches is nothing. I'll finish it fast, and then I won't have to keep thinking about it." "Library," Ryan agreed. Michael hesitated. A few classmates were heading off to explore the castle or stroll by the Black Lake. 2 girls giggled and invited him to the Quidditch pitch. He looked tempted, but then he laughed awkwardly and jogged after the others. "If everyone else were playing, I'd go, but someone's doing their homework early, and I'd feel bad just playing." Hogwarts Library sits on the west side of the castle. It's far larger inside than it looks from out front. Veedy was sure some kind of space-expanding magic had been used. The library rose in tiers with staircases winding between them, bookshelves intersecting silently and holding tens of thousands of volumes. Rows of reddish-brown desks were set between the stacks. On the first day of term, there were still few students. The 4 of them stopped at the entrance, mouths open at the sight. Madame Pince, the librarian, spotted them immediately and swept over. She peered down at the group. "New students?" Theo, in front, nodded. Madame Pince's voice went stern. "No scratching, tearing, folding, dirtying, damaging, or throwing books. No loud noises. No eating in the library. Understood?" Theo nodded so fast, it was as if he'd been imagining Snape's glare. "No going into the restricted section. You may browse the general stacks, but you may not write or draw in the books. If you wish to take a book out of the library, you must have my permission." All 4 nodded obediently. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Boil cure potion. Anything on potions," Michael said. Madame Pince waved her wand, and a dozen books fluttered down from several shelves. "These should be enough. Go study," she said, and for a moment a faint smile softened her usual severity. They found a window seat and spread the books out. Michael flipped through them and felt overwhelmed. The thinnest book was still nearly an inch thick. He wondered whether he could get away with copying a paragraph from the textbook and a sentence here and there to reach the required length. Then he heard the soft scratch of a quill beside him. "Veed?" Michael glanced over. "You're already writing?" Veed didn't look up. "It's not hard." A few books lay open in front of him, and in moments he'd put down 4 or 5 neat lines, the writing compact but clear. Michael and Theo stared. Even quiet Ryan peered across to read. Veed realized suddenly that he'd forgotten his companions were only 11. They weren't university students who could bang out 1,000 words in half an hour. Some of them might have had little formal schooling. He didn't mind sharing a method. Pulling out a fresh piece of parchment, he began to talk as he wrote. An essay's simple. Make a structure and fill it in. First, a brief introduction to the boil cure potion. Second, its history, who invented it and who improved it. Third, the brewing process and precautions. Fourth, what can go wrong, reasons a potion fails, what accidents might happen, and how to handle them. Fifth, analyze key ingredients and their interactions. You can find that in 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi and an Introduction to Common Potion Ingredients. Sixth, explain the illnesses the potion treats, causes, symptoms, dosage, and past case studies. You can compare similar potions by ingredients, brewing time, cost, and effectiveness. Finally, conclude and add your own thoughts. Pick 2 or 3 of those points and you'll have plenty to write about. The 3 boys were quiet for a second, then all reached for parchment and quills and began copying frantically, not just the facts, but Vadi's framework word for word. "You're a genius, Vade," Michael exclaimed as he copied. "This is an essay cheat sheet." Theo grinned. "Seriously, from now on, any essay, 6 inches? Forget it. I could do 6 feet. Ryan halted mid-stroke and regarded them solemnly. 6 feet is too much. 6 feet is still too much. I can't write that. Vadi and the others laughed. 11. History of Magic. The afternoon lesson was History of Magic, and Ravenclaw and Slytherin had it together. Sitting in front of Vade was a pale blonde boy, flanked by 2 chubby sidekicks. Vadi recognized him at once. Draco Malfoy, the minor antagonist who'd been at odds with the protagonist for 7 years in the original story. The relationship between Slytherin and Ravenclaw was generally civil, and Malfoy didn't lash out at everyone he met. Apart from his air of superiority and his habit of subtly showing off his family's wealth, he was fairly polite in class. But with his archenemy, Harry Potter, he was a different person. When Professor Binns slid into the room, passing through the wall in his usual spectral way, Malfoy was still bad-mouthing Harry to his cronies. Always showing off that scar on his head, like it's something to be proud of, and hanging out with the Weasleys, smelling of their shabby family. The Ravenclaws nearby exchanged discreet glances and edged away from the Slytherins. Regardless of what would happen in the future, Harry Potter was still a hero in the eyes of many witches and wizards. Most of the children at Hogwarts had grown up on stories about him. Malfoy's remarks made some of them uncomfortable and reminded others of unpleasant facts they'd been trying to ignore. Michael leaned toward Vede and whispered, "I heard Malfoy. Draco Malfoy's father was a Death Eater who followed you-know-who. After the Dark Lord was defeated, he claimed he had been under the Imperious Curse and donated a lot of money to the Ministry, which let him avoid prison. You can tell by how he acts that his father still resents Harry for defeating his master, so that influence trickles down." Vede shook his head subtly. Draco wasn't that deep. He'd probably wanted to be friends with Harry once, but when his arrogance was humiliated, he couldn't bear it. That was why he was so persistent in opposing the boy who lived. "Don't underestimate him, and don't get too close," Michael warned. "Their family is one of the 28 sacred families who care most about blood purity." 28 sacred families? Vede admitted he didn't know much about that. Michael shrugged. "There's supposed to be 28 pure-blood families with no Muggle ancestors and no marriages into Muggle families," he said. "But my dad says it's nonsense. Lots of those families actually have Muggle blood if you look closely, or they claim they do." History of Magic was, it had to be said, an incredibly boring class. Professor Binns, the ghost who taught it, lectured in a monotonous, lullaby-like voice that never varied. He asked no questions, paid no attention to what the students were doing, and spoke in a muffled, huffing tone. Within 5 minutes, half the class had dozed off. The rest were either napping or secretly drawing grids on their parchment to play board games. Vede, however, tuned out Professor Binns's soporific drone and drew a timeline instead, noting important dates, historical figures, and major events, exactly the sort of thing that appeared on History of Magic exams. He had a copy of Hogwarts, a history from the library on his desk, and comparing it to his notes, he couldn't help wondering what grand adventures and struggles the four founders had endured and what role Hogwarts had played over the last 1,000 years. History itself was fascinating. The problem was bins. When class finally ended, the droning stopped as abruptly as it had begun, and bins floated slowly through the wall. Veed nudged Michael awake, and the two of them went to the library to work on their assignment, a foot-long essay on the terrifying reign of the demon Emeric. "No one at Hogwarts is more diligent than you," Michael complained as he wrote. "I bet everyone else will wait until the last day to do their homework." Before he finished the complaint, a figure came by tottering under a tower of books. Hermione Granger, who'd made an impression the day they met, dropped her stack on the table with a thud that made Michael flinch. "Hi, Vady," she said, sitting down without ceremony. "How's Ravenclaw?" "It's fine, just a lot of stairs," Veed replied. "Hermione, this is Michael Corner. Michael, Hermione Granger, we met on the train." "Hello." Hermione had the eager confidence of a small lion. She stuck out her hand. "Are you in Ravenclaw too?" Michael looked at her pile of books, swallowed, and took her hand with obvious hesitation. Perhaps? He felt, quite suddenly, unworthy of the house name. Hermione frowned at his answer, as if his uncertainty were a personal offense. "May I ask, why did you take so many books? You can't possibly read them all at once, can you?" "Of course I will," she said matter-of-factly. "These are what I plan to finish this week." Michael's face went pale. He shot Vade a look that said, "A week? More competitive than you?" Vede raised an eyebrow, and Michael fell silent, hunching over his essay. Ved, who had already finished his paper, kept working on his timeline. "Oh, that's a good method," Hermione said, leaning over to look. "But you'd get even more insight if you linked it to Muggle history." "I'll add that later," Vede said, pushing the completed section toward her. "You've read more than I have. Can you check if anything here needs fixing?" Hermione didn't hesitate. She read carefully, then corrected him. "The exact date of wand creation is unknown. Milena Sims's main contribution was researching the magical properties of 18 types of wand wood. She proposed the theory of wand compatibility and Sims's formula." She pulled a book from her stack and flipped through it quickly. In 382 BC, the Ollivander family began making wands, and their descendants are still considered the best wand makers. That's likely to be an exam question. Quills scratched across parchment as they copied notes. Madame Pince shot occasional warning looks their way, as if ready to shush them into silence. Michael, already feeling small, silently slid a scrap of paper out to copy Veda's revised timeline. At that moment, Theo peered around the library doorway, still smudged with greenhouse dirt. Apparently, Madame Pince had refused to let him in. Seeing Vede and Michael, he waved eagerly and signaled for them to come out. Vede said goodbye to Hermione, and the three of them gathered their things. Ryan and Theo stood in the doorway, both looking like they'd just left herbology. Vede asked, "Is something up?" The two Hufflepuffs exchanged a look. Ryan nodded toward Theo, as if to say, "You tell him. You were the one who asked Professor Sprout." Theo laughed. "Vede, weren't you saying this morning you wanted a quiet place to practice spells? Professor Sprout's our Hufflepuff head. After class, I stayed to help her, and when I was done, I went and asked if we could use the greenhouses to practice. She said yes." 12. Cleaning up. "You asked a professor?" Michael sounded surprised. "After taking Snape's class, you still went to ask a professor?" Theo smiled. "Professor Sprout is different. She's especially kind. I figured asking permission would be better than sneaking around. Practicing magic isn't a bad thing." "Did she give us a place?" Vede asked. "Yes," Theo nodded. "An empty classroom that's been abandoned. Professor Sprout said it would work perfectly." "Then what are we waiting for?" "Let's go see it," Michael said cheerfully. He'd been dying to get out of the suffocating library. Just as the group started to leave, Vede paused and looked back. In the middle of the vast library, Hermione sat alone, buried in a book, and she looked lonely. He remembered that she hadn't had many friends yet. "Wait a moment," he said to the others. "I'll ask someone else to come." He tapped the book on the table twice. Hermione looked up and saw Vade smiling at her. "Hermione, we're going to practice magic together. Do you want to join us?" Hogwarts was the first wizarding school, Theo explained as they climbed the stairs, out of breath. A long time ago, maybe all underage wizards in Europe came here. Later, other schools opened, and some families moved to America. Those kids go to Ilvermorny now. So Hogwarts could normally handle 1 or 2 thousand students and hundreds of professors, Vid guessed. But with only a few hundred students now, lots of classrooms are empty. For safety, they've hidden most of them. Professor Sprout told us there's an empty charms classroom that's quite large, Ryan added. It's behind the portrait of Miss Claudia with the umbrella on the 3rd floor. They walked down the corridor near the West Tower until they found the portrait. On the canvas, a blonde girl stood on a flowery meadow, holding a white umbrella dotted with pink blossoms. She gazed off to the side with a faint melancholy. Ryan tapped the left side of the portrait 3 times and spoke the password, "Sunshine, golden daisies." The girl lifted her skirt and stepped aside. The portrait swung open. They filed through and the portrait closed behind them. Inside, dust lay thick over everything. Tables and chairs were scattered, and some were broken. Old books and crumpled parchment littered the floor. A row of wooden shelves along one wall was empty and cracked in places. In the corner, practice targets were piled up, most of them ruined. "All right," Hermione said, rolling up her sleeves. "We'll have to clean before we can practice. Who's going to fetch a basin?" "Me," Theo volunteered immediately. "I'll go find some supplies. Why don't we ask the house elves to clean?" Michael suggested lazily. "Hogwarts keeps house elves, you know." Ryan was already straightening an overturned chair. "Hold on." Veed stopped Theo at the doorway. "We're here to practice magic. Why don't we start by cleaning this classroom ourselves?" "What? No way." Michael looked at him in disbelief. "Scourgify and Reparo, those should do it. Moving furniture is levitation charm territory." "This is a big job, but it sounds fun," Theo said, smiling. Ryan set a chair upright and then, at Veed's prompting, waved his wand. "Scourgify!" The table brightened a little, but dirt still clung in the crevices. Veed watched closely. When Ryan cast again, the effect was only marginally better. Then Veed noticed something, a faint overlapping arc when Ryan moved his wand, an extra trajectory, similar but slightly different from Ryan's. It was like watching a game cheat calculate the perfect path. "Ryan," Veed said, "raise your wand a little higher and end the motion more decisively." He demonstrated. "And say Scourgify with a lighter gi. Try it again." Ryan hesitated for a second, then, trusting the suggestion, recreated Veed's motion. "Scourgify." The table instantly shone, as if no dust could live on it. The floor beneath it gleamed too. Ryan's eyes widened as he looked from his wand to Veed and whispered, "How did you do that?" The others crowded around to look. Theo touched the table and grinned. "Ryan, I didn't know. You're actually a magic prodigy." "No, it's not me," Ryan stammered, bewildered. He tried again, but his thoughts were scattered and the spell faltered. Vede didn't explain. He cast the spell himself, and though he didn't perceive the extra arc the way he'd seen it on others, he could only see the names above people's heads, not his own. He knew from guiding Ryan what the correct motion felt like. His cast was perfect and covered an even larger area. He had the others try again while he watched. Whenever they did it incorrectly, Vede could see the faint golden arcs he'd noticed before. Even Hermione's was not flawless, though only a little off from the ideal. Vede adjusted each student's motion with small, precise corrections, bringing their spells closer to perfection. As he did, his understanding deepened. After a while, he could flick his wand and produce a spotless cleaning charm without even speaking the incantation. If his talent had a name, Veda thought it would be a good teacher system. A glance at a student, and he could tell which name to call, who was serious, who was half-hearted. One-on-one, he could make microscopic changes that let someone master a spell in the shortest time. The metaphorical golden finger was taciturn, so he didn't know whether it held other functions waiting to be unlocked. For now, he had to explore it slowly. Vede had thought that with the right instruction, most spells would be easy to pick up. He was wrong. The level of magic anyone could perform depended on talent. For simple charms, like the scouring charm or the repairing charm, there wasn't much difference between students. But as the spells grew more difficult, differences showed. Theo began to struggle. After more than a dozen tries, the levitation charm was still hit or miss for him. Ryan and Michael were better, but inconsistent. Hermione succeeded on her first try, although she had trouble levitating anything heavy. Still, for first years, even mastering a basic charm felt like a small triumph. As they walked toward the Great Hall for dinner, Michael was still bragging to Theo. "Did you see my repairing charm? It was perfect. I fixed that chandelier in an instant. It probably wasn't that bright when they first hung it." Ryan, meanwhile, was muttering and waving his wand under his breath, practicing silently. Sparks flew from the tip and leapt toward Hermione's hair. "Don't point your wand at people," she snapped then, almost pleading. "What are you practicing?" It was written all over her face. "Please ask me." "The levitation charm," Ryan said. He had a patient temperament and could feel the helpful intent behind Hermione's bossiness, so he stayed calm. "But you already got it a moment ago," she said in surprise. Ryan shook his head. "It still feels like something's missing." The rich smell of dinner hit them as they entered the great hall. Only then did they notice how hungry they were. "Merlin," Theo murmured, "I could eat a whole ox." That first glow of accomplishment was intoxicating, but the grind of practice was steep. After dinner, Michael could barely contain himself. He dragged his doormate Terry out to the courtyard to play gobstones. Hermione and the others went back to their common rooms to do homework. V took advantage of the library still being open and checked out the 2 books he'd picked earlier that day. Earlier that afternoon, they'd cleaned out the practice room, repaired tables and chairs pushed against the wall, empty cabinets repurposed as bookshelves. V'd put the light on, set out ink and quills, and settled at a table. Cheers and laughter from young witches and wizards drifted in from outside as he opened his books. The first was Magical Theory. The margin note he mentally underlined: tampering with the deepest secrets, the source of life, the essence of self, can have terrible, even deadly consequences. The second was an analysis of the operating principles of basic spells, which began with a clear line he liked: magic is the manifestation of a wizard's will. Most young wizards, drawn to flashy effects or hungry for power, preferred impressive jinxes to dry theory. They would rather learn 2 tricks like hot pepper breath than wade through heavy textbooks. Vade was different. In his previous life, his teachers had drilled one lesson into him: understand the essence, grasp the principles, master the rules. That way you don't rely on rote repetition. You learn why things work and can solve new problems without endless practice. His teachers called him a model student. He went to bed early, woke early, had time for games, and still ranked among the top. In this life, he kept the same habits. Whether in science or magic, whether or not you had a lucky edge, a solid foundation made everything easier. Defense against the dark arts turned out far worse than he'd expected. Vita had heard that Professor Quirrell was a brilliant Ravenclaw who had taught Muggle studies the year before. Young, handsome, full of knowledge, and popular with students. Even with a dark parasite lurking on the back of his head, Veda had hoped Quirrell's knowledge would remain. But Quirrell lectured in a monotone, his words slurred and indistinct from the back of the room. Up close, his breath smelled overwhelmingly of garlic. Even the Slytherins flinched. Veed could sympathize. Who could prepare lessons properly with an evil will gnawing at their mind? But sympathy didn't mean tolerance. For the second class, he sat as far back as possible and read his book. Transfiguration was different. Transfiguration is the most complex and dangerous branch of magic you will learn at Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall said, stern as ever. Anyone who misbehaves in my class will be expelled and never allowed back. She flicked her wand. The desk before her became a pig, and then, with a crisp flick, returned to wood. Everyone watched with wide eyes. Transfiguration is the most elegant magic, she continued, but you must first learn Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration. Write this down. Don't be dull-witted. She listed rules. Before casting, you must clearly visualize what you want the object to become. No distracting thoughts. Chaotic thinking leads to failure, and there are countless examples. Wave your wand firmly and decisively. When you start, you must speak the incantation aloud. Advanced wizards can perform transfiguration without it. Incomplete transfiguration is irresponsible and dangerous, especially with biological subjects. This involves the 3 theories of the law of transfiguration. Failure can have serious consequences. There was a French wizard a few years ago So if transfiguration fails, you must immediately stop and restore the original state. The incantation is reparo. Now practice with me. Vedi filled at least 13 inches of parchment with notes and practiced reparo until his wrist cramped before McGonagall would let them actually begin transfiguration. She handed everyone a match and told them to turn it into a needle. Some students chanted loudly and jabbed their wands at matches, but nothing happened. Vede hesitated. The line from the book, "Magic is the manifestation of a wizard's will," flashed through his mind. He didn't act immediately. 14. Charms magic is almost a form of wishful thinking, and transfiguration is the purest expression of that. Many students assumed their transfigurations failed because their incantations weren't precise enough or their wand movements not decisive enough, so they tried every trick they could think of. But when Professor McGonagall had simply tapped the table with her wand and turned it into a pig without any elaborate flourish, it made all those theories look foolish. Vade raised his wand and pointed it at a match on the desk. In his head, a clear image, firm belief, absolute confidence. If the idea of needle in your mind is hazy, or if you keep thinking, "This is hard, can magic really do this, or I'll fail at first," then the spell will be that much harder. A wand is a channel for the magic inside a wizard, coaxing it into order. The words, gestures, and rituals are ways to strengthen belief, a kind of self-hypnosis. An accomplished wizard can alter the world by will alone, without unnecessary theatrics. Excellent, Miss Granger. Professor McGonagall's voice cut across his thoughts. A very clear change. Gryffindor gets 1 point. Heads turned. The match in front of Hermione was indeed thin and sharpened to a point, with a faint silvery sheen, more like a needle than a match. The brown-haired girl struggled to keep her excitement contained. Her eyes sparkled. "Miss Granger, would you demonstrate the transformation for everyone again?" Professor McGonagall asked, smiling. "Given that." Before she could finish, there was a gasp from the other side of the room. Vede's match, which had been ordinary a moment ago, elongated and slimmed, a tiny hole appearing at the base. Its surface took on a metallic glint. Professor McGonagall hurried over, levitated the needle with her wand, and examined it closely. Relief and pleasure softened her features. A perfectly flawless transformation. Ravenclaw gets 3 points. She changed both needles back to matches and asked the students to gather round so Vede could demonstrate. Under the scrutiny of the whole class, Vede spoke the words softly and tapped the match with the tip of his wand. The match stretched and changed color until, in an instant, a slender silver needle lay on his desk. A chorus of amazed "wows" rippled through the classroom. Vede glanced up. Hermione's face reflected a flicker of reluctance, but when his eyes met hers, she held his gaze for a heartbeat. Beside them, the boy with messy black hair, Harry, smiled kindly, his expression full of wonder and admiration. The red-haired freckled boy next to him, Ron, looked dazed. "They say Ravenclaws are the smartest," Ron told Harry as class let out. "I'm starting to understand it a bit now." There were 10 minutes between Transfiguration and Charms, just enough time to change classrooms. Professor McGonagall finished setting homework, and a group of students hurried toward the Charms classroom. Charms was still a combined class for Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. "Vede," Hermione said, ignoring house boundaries and sliding into the seat beside him. "Do you have plans after class?" "I'm going to the practice rooms," he replied. "That's good." Hermione exhaled with obvious relief. "I'm going there too, to keep practicing Transfiguration. How did you do it so quickly? Is there a trick?" "I suppose the trick is to believe you can do it," Vede began, firmly. "That's the most important." He didn't get to finish. Professor Flitwick bustled in. Phileas Flitwick, Charms professor and head of Ravenclaw, was barely a meter tall, with a mop of white hair and a fluffy white beard. His desk was a stack of books arranged like steps so he could stand above the students, and he climbed to the top with exaggerated care. A few of the students in the middle snickered at the sight, but Flitwick took it in good humor. All right, children," he said in his thin, reedy voice, waving a short wand. "Perhaps some of you wonder why this little teacher is standing before you." A trio of tiny birds burst from the end of his wand and fluttered overhead. He tapped again, and 2 books sprouted spindly arms and legs and began to pirouette in midair. Applause and delighted laughter filled the room. Students already liked him. He was neither timid like Quirrell, nor dull like Professor Binns, nor strict and forbidding like McGonagall or Snape. The Ravenclaws especially swelled with pride. Their head must be the best professor at Hogwarts. Thank you, Professor Flitwick chirped. I believe charms is the most interesting subject. A wizard who cannot cast spells cannot be called a wizard. But first, attendance. He called names from the roster, and things went smoothly until Harry Potter. Before Harry could answer, Professor Flitwick gave a small squeal and toppled off his stack of books with a thump. The students stared in stunned silence. Harry awkwardly raised his hand. "I'm here, Professor," he said to the empty stack. Another small squeak came from beneath the books. After a moment, Flitwick crawled free, his beard in disarray, muttering, "Oh, of course, you're certainly in my classroom. Of course, I should have known." He fussed with his beard, gave it a perfunctory scourgify, and then beamed at Harry. "It's good to see you, my boy." Harry smiled shyly. Veed couldn't tell whether Professor Flitwick had seen some sort of shadow in Harry, but the old man looked as pleased as if in the presence of royalty. Flitwick continued the roll call and then moved on to his lesson. The first charms lesson was mostly theory. They went over one simple spell, lumos. It was something most young wizards had been practicing at home before school even started, so by the end of class everyone could produce light from their wands. Professor Flitwick was generous with his marks and split points fairly between the houses. He assigned very little homework, a short summary of the key points covered in class, which, Vady thought, a lazy student could probably pass off with a copy of someone else's notes. 15. Difference in academic ability. Veed's life at Hogwarts settled into a routine after the new students gradually got used to the castle's ever-changing staircases. First years had a relaxed schedule, sometimes only one class a day, never more than 3, and the rest of the time was up to the students. Seeing that kind of timetable, Veed had once suspected why so many of the pupils who complained about the professor's heavy homework still couldn't even finish a short essay on time. In his previous life, Vady could write at least 300 Chinese characters before he was 10, a compact form that would easily expand to 1,000 words in English. After systematic training through high school, university, and postgraduate studies, he could crank out 10,000 words in 2 days. It was only after studying with Michael, Hermione, and the others for a while that he understood why many of them struggled. Among the first years, besides Veed, Hermione was the easiest when it came to essays. She rarely made basic grammar mistakes, hardly ever misspelled a word, could quickly find the main points in a textbook, and then explain them clearly and logically. The other 3, even Michael from Ravenclaw, had more trouble with all of that. They were from wizarding families. Wizarding life is almost completely isolated from the non-magical world, even when one parent is Muggle-born. Most wizarding families live in seclusion. They rarely contact Muggles and often place Muggle-repelling charms around their homes to keep Muggles from accidentally coming across them. As a result, wizards don't know much about Muggle clothing or technology, and they certainly don't send their children to Muggle schools. To many of them, sending a child to learn among Muggles would be like putting them in with monkeys. Britain has only one school for magic, Hogwarts. There are no magic primary schools or magic universities. Children under 11 are usually taught at home. If parents have the time, they teach reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. With less responsible parents, a child might not even learn to hold a quill. Michael and the others generally started reading and writing at 5 or 6, so literacy wasn't the problem. Being able to read and write is different from having disciplined learning skills. Compared with the systematic education of Muggle schools, wizarding home education missed a lot. Parents rarely trained children in logical reasoning or inductive summarizing, skills many wizards seem to have little use for, since they tended to look down on Muggle theories. Most young wizards, Hermione aside, lacked the ability to quickly extract and understand the core of a text. For example, a young wizard might grasp at best, if A and B are the same temperature, and B and C are the same temperature, then A and C are the same temperature. But a textbook might say, if each of 2 thermodynamic systems is in thermal equilibrium with a third, then they are in thermal equilibrium with each other. That is, if it can be affirmed that the physical properties of two systems will not change when heat can be exchanged, then even if the two systems are not allowed to exchange heat, they can be said to be in equilibrium with each other. Young wizards? The formal statement slips past their minds. Hermione could rely on her strong memory to learn by rote and then slowly understand by comparing different materials. Most others would scribble down notes they didn't understand, scratch their heads, and hand in a poor assignment, hoping a lenient professor would pass them. Boarding school life after 11 was another factor. Professors rarely policed students' free time. No matter how strict a professor might be in class, they wouldn't worry if first years were asleep in their dorms or playing in the common room. That relaxed environment is a real test of self-control for children. Laziness and the desire to play are human. Studying is not naturally appealing. Only a small number of people find it interesting, like Hermione and like Veed. Within half a month, the two of them had stood out among the first years. Hermione was strict with herself and with others, refusing to let anyone copy or break the rules. Veed, by contrast, didn't mind if others copied his homework. When he was absorbed in study or repeating spells in the practice room, he never pushed others to do the same. He understood the laziness of teenagers. He had been that way in his previous life. He worked harder now, not because he loved studying, but because he loved magic. Magic wasn't an innate, taken-for-granted talent for him, so he treasured the opportunity more than anyone else at school. After practicing until near curfew, Veed hurried back to Ravenclaw Tower. The corridors were quiet, as if everyone had gone to bed, but the common room was still brightly lit. Hogwarts had a curfew, but not a lights-out time. If students wanted, they could stay in the common room all night. Tonight there were pupils of many years around, couples whispering softly on a sofa, bored youngsters playing wizard's chess on a round table, older students busily writing to finish homework. Despite the numbers, it was quiet. Ravenclaws kept their voices low. 7 or 8 girls sat on the sofa in front of the fire, sharing occasional giggles. Veed glanced over and then found a secluded corner to sit with a book and his quill. Michael, who had been with the group, noticed him. He murmured something to the girl beside him, then walked over and sat down. "Studying this late again?" Michael leaned against the table. "Veed, we've been here less than a month and you've already covered almost all the first-year material. What are you going to do with the rest of the term? I'm not criticizing, but you're working a bit too hard. Sometimes you should relax. Do you know how many girls want to meet you?" He raised an eyebrow toward the fireplace, prompting another round of giggles from the girls. Veed paused, set down his quill, and looked at Michael with his quiet gray eyes. "I don't know," he said. "But Michael, do you know how long we can stay at Hogwarts?" 16. Time waits for no one. What? Michael looked bewildered. Hogwarts went for 7 years, but anyone who failed an owl had to leave at the end of 5th year. It was common knowledge. He didn't understand why Veed was asking like it was a mystery. 7 years, Veed said softly. There are 52 weeks in a year. Take away the summer and Christmas holidays, and we only spend about 38 weeks at school each year. 7 years is only 266 weeks. Michael thought for a moment. That's true, so? Veed's eyes darkened with urgency. So, even if I could finish 1 book a week, in 7 years I'd only get through 266 books. But how many books are in the Hogwarts library? Thousands. It's a vault of treasure, but you walk in with a sack and leave with only a few galleons worth. Isn't that a shame? Michael felt the logic strike him. A little panic rose. Time really did wait for no one. And think about this, Veed went on. These 7 years, these 266 weeks, are the safest place in the world to ask questions of the greatest wizards alive. Our Transfiguration professor is Minerva McGonagall, one of only a handful of animagi in the 20th century. Charms is taught by Flitwick, the dueling champion. Potions by Severus Snape, a master of his craft. Even if defense against the dark arts is unreliable, where else will we find this kind of teaching after Hogwarts? After we graduate, who will patiently walk you through advanced magic or potions? When you finally decide you need a powerful spell and have no one to ask, won't you wish you had spent more time in the library? Not only Michael, but the other students nearby, who had fallen quiet, found themselves nodding. Veed's next question cut deep. "So, Michael," she said, her voice low, "do you still think it's enough to read only 8 books in 1/7 of our time?" Convinced, Michael shook his head hard. He wanted to speak, but the 2 weeks he'd already squandered made him anxious. He stopped chatting with the girls, dug out the beginner's guide to Transfiguration he'd tossed aside, and began to study. The Ravenclaw common room settled into a hush, the rustle of pages and the scratch of quills the only sounds. 2 fifth-years who returned just before curfew noticed the silence and, half expecting Snape, tiptoed into their dormitory so quietly they didn't dare breathe. Dinner in the Great Hall. "Something's off, Fred." "You're right. Really off, George." The red-haired twins glanced at each other, reached out, and grabbed a Ravenclaw boy at random, hauling him to their table before he could shout. "What do you two want, Weasley?" The Ravenclaw snapped, impatient. "I haven't got time for your pranks." What?" Ron, chewing a chicken leg, looked upward blankly. "None of your business, little Ronnie." Fred shoved his brother's head back. The twins flanked the Ravenclaw, one arm over each shoulder. "Davis, what's going on with your lot lately? Holding books while eating. Holding books while walking. We barely see Ravenclaws in the courtyard at lunch. Even Quidditch practice isn't the same. You didn't even go on a date this weekend. You weren't this into reading before, were you? Seriously, did Snape slip you a potion?" The idea of Snape and a lovey-dovey draught made Roger Davis shiver. "Don't be ridiculous. Snape wouldn't give out a love potion. No, I mean there isn't a love of learning potion. No, we just realized life's short and time to learn is even shorter." Fred and George blinked. Davis took a breath, and Ernest explained the 266 weeks calculation, the mountain of books, and how not studying was like entering a treasure vault and leaving empty-handed. After his speech, Davis went back to the Ravenclaw table and ate while reading. The Weasleys exchanged looks. Even Harry and Ron, who'd been concentrating on their plates, slowed down. A hush of industriousness began to ripple through Hogwarts. For most, it lasted only 3 minutes. Ron finished his History of Magic essay and then went back to enchanted chess. The twins continued to prioritize pranks and tinkering. But some students were quietly motivated. Michael oscillated between bursts of effort and distractions. Bright but lazy, he'd sometimes be swept up by Vady and study hard for a spell, then soon get sidetracked by playing with enchanted paper figures or talking music and clothes with girls. The practice room, where they rehearsed spells and techniques, was often occupied by Vady, Hermione, Theo, and Ryan. Occasionally, Professor Sprout of Herbology would drop in, likely to check they weren't experimenting recklessly. She examined their setup, praised their progress, awarded 5 points to each of their houses, and told them they could come to her with questions whenever she wasn't teaching. Professor Sprout was gentle and kind, never showing house favoritism except for a special fondness for anyone talented in herbology. Soon after, Sprout recommended a Gryffindor to their group, Neville Longbottom. The round-faced boy was honest and straightforward, clumsy with spells and a slow learner, but diligent and well-meaning. He fit in quickly. On Saturday evening, a notice on the first-year bulletin board caused a stir. Starting next week, flying class. Chapter 17, Flying Class. Flying had always been humanity's greatest dream, and Vady was no exception. To him, one of the best things about learning magic was the chance to soar through the sky. Sure, you could fly on a Muggle airplane, more comfortable than riding a broom or a Pegasus, but nothing felt as cool as catching the wind on a broomstick. Ravenclaw's flying lesson was scheduled with Hufflepuff on Friday afternoon. Gryffindor and Slytherin had gone the day before. From Monday on, every first-year student had been buzzing about it, and Michael was no different. "You know what my most thrilling experience was?" Michael boasted over a sausage on his fork. "I dove off a cliff on a broom, racing an eagle. We dropped from 1,300 meters and only stopped 15 centimeters above the ground. I could feel the grass tickling my nose." "That's incredible!" Theo from the next table exclaimed. "Michael, you should play Quidditch. You've got to be able to do the Wronski feint. Many famous players can't even pull that off." Michael flushed and stammered. "Oh, of course. Once Professor Flitwick sees me in flying, he might invite me to join the Quidditch team right away." Definitely. You're a genius, Theo enthused, and Michael's grin widened, though a few older Ravenclaw girls at the long table watched him with amused skepticism. To cover his embarrassment, Michael turned to Veed. Do you want some flying tips before class? So you won't be nervous. I'm an expert. I flew around the house on a broom before I could even walk. Really? I could use some guidance, Hermione said, suddenly appearing with Neville and sitting down next to them, arms full of books. Quidditch Through the Ages, The Wigtown Wanderer's Miracle, He Flew Like a Madman, and the like. You borrowed all those? Vide asked. Yes, but they're not much use, Hermione said anxiously, dumping them on the table. They're mostly about Quidditch. They don't explain how to fly smoothly at all. Her words drew instant protests from the Quidditch fans. Michael arched an eyebrow. Barbaric. Hermione, you don't get it. Quidditch is the most popular, most thrilling sport. Everyone loves it. It isn't barbaric. You don't understand its wild charm. Isn't it? Hermione shot back. Quidditch used to involve the golden snidget. That bird was hunted until it nearly went extinct. Golden snidget? Michael asked, confused. Is that like the golden snitch? Veedy, who had read about it, answered. The golden snidget was a small, very agile bird. In early Quidditch, they'd release a snidget, and the match ended when a seeker caught it. Because so many were killed, snidget numbers plummeted and they became protected. The golden snitch was later invented to replace the snidget, but some teams kept the old custom. That's why the snidget is a protected species now. Hermione looked up. Exactly. Quidditch is built on the boundless golden snidgets. It's a brutal sport when you think about it. People cheer for it, but nobody thinks about the birds. She clutched her books and stormed off, leaving the boys staring at one another. After a moment, Neville mumbled, So, the flying tips? Is there anything else? I've never flown, Neville said, worried. My gran would never let me near a broom, not even a toy. Ahem, of course, Michael said, bright and confident. Riding a broom is simple. Hold the handle, push off with your feet, and keep your balance. Turning takes flexibility. Different broom models handle differently. The school's brooms are decent, like a shooting star, but the best right now is definitely the Nimbus 2000. His flying guidance was basically 2 or 3 practical points followed by a long monologue about the Nimbus series. Theo nodded along, as if every word were gospel. Neville listened with wide, round eyes, trying to memorize it all, but his notes boiled down to 3 lines. Hold the handle, push off, keep balance. Ryan leaned over to Veed and whispered, Michael's probably only ever ridden a toy broom. Why do you say that? Have you flown? Veed asked. No, I haven't. My mum said it was too dangerous, Ryan said. But my dad has a Comet. He took me up a few times. For beginners, it's best to sit still and steady. Don't rush. The real brooms are fast, and they don't limit how high you go. Veed looked at Michael's confident swagger and shrugged. Don't worry, he said. The professor will be there. He didn't remember every detail of Harry Potter's plot, but he did recall that Neville had a moment of courage in the final battle. What could possibly go wrong in an ordinary flying lesson? Still, he tried to dredge up other memories. There was a flying class scene. He thought, Neville bullied by Draco, then Harry defended him. Yes, that felt right. On Thursday afternoon, Ravenclaw had charms with Slytherin. When the lesson ended, the Slytherins rushed out to the school lawn. That's where flying class was held. Ravenclaw had no more lessons that day and went along to watch. Students clustered in 2s and 3s in the corridor, trying to eavesdrop on Madame Hooch to pick up any tips before their own lesson. Then, before they had time to settle, they saw Neville. Everyone watched as the nervous boy suddenly shot straight up into the sky like a cannon. Ah! Ah! Came a terrified scream from above, and before anyone could do more than gasp, the figure plunged down and crashed into the bushes with a heavy thud. Silence fell over the watching crowd. 18. Infirmary. Is he dead? A girl whispered, terrified. The Ravenclaws who had watched the scene were suddenly filled with a horror of flying class. Michael, who had been talking non-stop just moments before, went pale. He stared at the figure on the grass and, voice trembling, asked, Is it my fault? Vade patted his shoulder. It shouldn't be too serious. He didn't land on his head. Michael swallowed and couldn't speak. Madame Hooch, however, was already running across the field. She helped Neville up quickly. His wrist looked wrong. but he was alive. Hooch supported him as they made their way toward the hospital wing, shouting to the other students not to move. Michael begged, "Let's go see Neville." Vede glanced at the stunned students left on the lawn, nodded, and the two of them ran down the corridor toward the hospital wing. As they reached the door, they heard Madame Pomfrey's voice through it, brisk and a little weary. "Flying class, isn't it? Every year about this time the first years manage to pull something. Can't remember a single peaceful term." Vede pushed the door open, and Michael ducked his head in first. Neville was sitting on a hospital bed with tears in his eyes, while Madame Pomfrey ran her wand over his arm, a scattering of featherlight sparks coming from the tip. "I'll leave him with you," Madame Hooch said, hurriedly. "There are still over 20 students out on the lawn with unattended brooms. If there were more time, I'd have Mr. Filch watch them." "All right, Madame Pomfrey began. Hooch, clearly impatient, only caught the word "all right" before whisking off. The sudden opening of the door made Michael stumble. Hooch's eagle-like gaze sharpened as if to scold, but when she noticed the blue and bronze ties the boys were wearing, her stern look softened. They hadn't been in her class, and she had no time to deal with them. She left at once. "Take care of this child," Madame Pomfrey finished to herself, her tone gentler as she soothed Neville. "Don't worry, it's a small problem. We'll fix it quickly. You won't miss dinner, I promise." She plucked a potion off a shelf with her wand and had Neville drink it. Then she murmured a spell and waved the wand over his arm. In a blink, the wrist was mended. Neville barely flinched when he felt it. Vede watched, impressed. "And you too." Madame Pomfrey turned to the boys by the door. "Injured? Sick? Bad stomach?" Michael's lips moved, but he said nothing. Vede stepped forward. "Madame Pomfrey, we came to see Neville." "Oh, visiting a friend." Pomfrey looked pleased. "Mr. Longbottom just needs to rest a bit longer. Once his bone's properly set, he can go back with you." "Thank you, madam," Vede said. Neville, wiping his eyes, said thank you too. When Pomfrey had left, Vede asked, "How are you, Neville? Does your wrist still hurt?" "It doesn't hurt much," Neville said, pulling up his robe to show he was already getting better. The scrapes on his legs were healing too. "Look, this side's almost fine. Madame Pomfrey's magic is incredible. St. Mungo's must be like this all the time." "St. Mungo's," Vede repeated. "Britain's biggest magic hospital," Neville said. "All the best healers work there." Michael shuffled forward and whispered, "Neville?" Neville looked up. Michael lowered his head, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I lied. I've never actually ridden a broom before. The tricks I talked about, I heard them on the radio. I've got no experience." Neville blinked. "I know," he said. "Huh?" Michael looked surprised. Neville explained. "Hermione said that if you'd ridden often, you wouldn't be so excited about flying class." Michael's face burned. Everyone had noticed his boastful chatter. "But Hermione also said," Neville went on, "everything you said is right. It's in books. But flying isn't something you can learn just from theory, is it?" For some reason, Michael felt like crying. Vede watched them with a smile. He'd felt a bit like a babysitter for his new classmates, but in that moment, he thought maybe they could really become friends. Although Madame Pomfrey had mended Neville's wrist, it still needed time to heal properly. Guilt kept Michael from leaving him alone in the hospital wing. He insisted on waiting until Neville was fully recovered before going to eat. The moving stairs conspired against them, and the route back to the Great Hall took twice as long as usual. By the time they returned, the last of the desserts on the long tables had vanished. "Ah, darn it," Michael said, face sour. "I should still have some candy in my dormitory." "Hey, Michael, Neville, Vede." Theo and Ryan approached. The two were inseparable, friends since childhood, always together like conjoined twins. "We heard Neville had an accident in flying class," Theo said, looking at Neville with concern. "Are you all right?" "Broke my wrist," Neville said, holding up his arm. "But Madame Pomfrey fixed it right away." "That's great," Theo said, taking Neville's arm and examining it. "Did you have dinner?" Ryan asked. "We didn't see you earlier." "No." Michael looked at them pleadingly. "Did you save us any bread or something?" "No, but even better." Theo grabbed Michael's sleeve and pulled him out of the Great Hall. "Come on." "Where are we going?" Neville asked, puzzled. "You'll see. This is a Hufflepuff secret," Theo said, eyes bright. "An older student told us about it the day before yesterday." "I bet nothing can be hidden from the Weasley twins," Michael muttered to Vidi, who nodded. They ducked through a door and descended a stone staircase into a wide corridor lit by torches. Like the rest of the castle, its walls were hung with paintings, but these were unusual. Almost all of them showed food. Theo stopped in front of a large painting of fruit and reached out to tickle a pear painted on the canvas. The pear squirmed as if ticklish, giggled, and then folded into itself, becoming a green doorknob. Theo grabbed it and pulled. One by one, they stepped through into a huge room. It matched the great hall above in size and layout. 4 long tables stretched out, but they were empty. Along the stone walls gleamed an array of kitchen utensils. At the far end, a brick hearth crackled with an incendio, filling the air with the smell of roasting meat. The room was full of odd little creatures. Bat-like ears, round, bulging frog-like eyes the size of tennis balls, long pencil-thin noses, and gangly limbs. They wore tea towels embroidered with the Hogwarts crest like robes. At the sound of the students, they all turned their heads and watched, eager and attentive, but didn't rush forward. Wherever Vidi and the others looked, the house elves bowed and curtsied with exaggerated respect. "Oh my," Michael exclaimed, almost envious. "So many house elves." "Welcome to the Hogwarts kitchens." Theo spread his arms. "This is the best place in Hogwarts. You can ask them to make anything. These house elves are enthusiastic about food," Ryan added. Vede bent down to the nearest elf. "Hello, could we get something to eat?" Of course, sir," the elf squeaked. "It would be my great honor." Soon platters arrived. Pies, steaks, roast potatoes, tarts, raisin pudding. There was orange juice, pumpkin juice, vegetable juice, and even 2 bottles of butterbeer. When they'd eaten their fill, the house elves piled out desserts, cream cakes, and fried jam donuts, determined to make sure nobody left hungry. "I can't eat another bite," Neville mumbled, holding an ice cream and managing a lick. "Almost every Hufflepuff knows where the kitchens are, since our common room is nearby," Theo told Michael. "It's an open secret. Our common room is always full of nice things. Hufflepuff never goes hungry." "That's wonderful," Michael sighed, sipping his butterbeer. "Why didn't I get sorted into Hufflepuff?" "What are you talking about?" Ryan scoffed. "I heard you during the sorting. Didn't you say if you'd been put in Hufflepuff, you'd rather drop out?" "Ravenclaw isn't so great either," Michael grumbled. "Ravenclaw Tower is too high, too high. I feel like I'm dying climbing those stairs every day. Every time class ends and I have to go back to the common room, it takes so much willpower." He sounded a little tipsy, complaining with theatrical sorrow. Vede, who'd avoided overdoing it at dinner, was nevertheless a first-time drinker with a poor tolerance. 2 rum-filled chocolates and a glass of butterbeer had made him lightheaded. The room spun and people doubled. He propped his chin on his hand and began inspecting the house elves one by one. Coco, Amy, Becky, Harby, Lola, Phil. Being named by a wizard seemed to be the highest honor. The house elves lined up to announce themselves as if it were a ritual. Zoe, are you a girl?" Vede asked when he recognized the elf who had first spoken to him. To the untrained eye, the house elves had wrinkled faces like octogenarians. Apart from their names, their clothing and features gave no obvious clue to gender. Yes, Mr. Gray," Zoe said, nervously twisting her fingers together. "Are you the ones who clean our rooms and do our laundry?" Vede asked. Yes, sir," Zoe nodded eagerly. "Zoe, Harby, and Phil look after Ravenclaw Tower." Vede noticed a tiny flower embroidered on her tea towel and realized she was indeed female. "Do you clean other parts of the castle too?" "Yes, sir." "You brought our luggage off the train, didn't you?" "Yes, sir." "You've worked hard," Vede said softly. No, how could it be?" Zoe protested. "We love to work. Work doesn't tire us. It's not working that's terrible." The house elves all insisted on how devoted they were, cooking dinners to satisfy every palate, polishing silver until it shone, scrubbing muddy shoes spotless, appearing and disappearing without disturbing anyone. They spoke of their work with pride and almost reverent dedication. Vede watched them quietly for a long time, saying nothing. After dinner, it was nearly curfew. The house elves continued to press cakes and donuts on them with enthusiastic insistence. Then the students drifted back toward their respective common rooms. Vede and Michael climbed the moving staircase, breathless, when an armored suit by the wall suddenly wobbled. A white figure leapt free and let out a bestial roar. "Ah!" Michael was startled. His legs gave out, and he plopped down on the steps. Ha! The white figure clutched its stomach and laughed, floating in the air and kicking its feet. Michael was half annoyed, half amused. Peeves, hiding here scaring people again? Peeves was the castle's trouble-making poltergeist. He could float and take a more physical form, tugging at things and creating chaos for his own pleasure. Look, two little wizards wandering around at night instead of sleeping, he cackled, circling them. Just you wait. I'll call Filch. He'll catch you little rascals. Peeves loved to frighten students out after curfew, chase them, tug robes, steal hairpins, anything to watch them scramble back to their dormitories. This time, though, he miscalculated. With a lazy flick of Veed's wand, a line of golden letters flashed in front of them, showing the current time. Ha! Michael panted with a triumphant laugh. There are still 7 minutes until curfew. You can't trick us now, Peeves. Peeves's round eyes darted about. He sniffed, sly. 7 minutes. That's not nearly enough time for you to get back to Ravenclaw Tower. We'll be back before you can blink and call Filch, Veed said calmly. Peeves scowled and muttered, Humph, boring Ravenclaws. Then he floated off in search of other mischief. Michael breathed a sigh of relief. Good thing Peeves didn't catch us. It would have been awful if he actually ran off to Filch. Peeves wouldn't do that. Veed hauled him up from the floor. Have you forgotten? They hate each other. Peeves wouldn't want to do anything that pleased Filch. That's true, Michael nodded. Peeves loved mischief, knocking over statues, spilling ink, anything that quietly added work for the castle caretaker and drove Filch mad. They climbed the winding stairs of Ravenclaw Tower, growing dizzy. They had to stop now and then, thighs burning as if they weren't their own. Normally, Michael would complain the whole way. Unless there were pretty girls around, then he'd pretend it was nothing and stop to take care of them. Today, he was unusually quiet. Only when they were almost back at the common room did he murmur, We've got flying class tomorrow, too. Veed replied. Forget all that nonsense I said. Michael mumbled. Just take it slow and do what Madam Hooch tells you. Veed sighed. Neville's fall was an accident. Not everyone's that unlucky. Michael probably knew it, but the weight on his mind didn't lift right away. They made it back to the tower after curfew, but a few students still lingered in the corridor. Ravenclaws weren't immune to being stumped. Even the cleverest minds hit blind spots. Sometimes more than 20 students clustered outside the common room, heads bent over the day's puzzle. V tapped the bronze knocker on the wooden door. The eagle's beak clicked open, and it spoke in the knotted, almost chanting voice the knocker always used. It has hands both above and below. Sometimes it crawls and sometimes it walks. When it walks, it's like a human. When it crawls, it's like a dog. The door only opened if the knocker's question was answered. Michael pictured some many-handed creature creeping in the dark and shivered. What kind of monster is that? Some mythological thing? Someone else rifled through a bag. Don't bother. Fantastic beasts and where to find them won't have it, a Ravenclaw said warily. I checked the whole book. They all nodded. Veed stood thinking. The knocker was like a sphinx. Its questions weren't always hard, but they weren't obvious either. It never said whether the answer was a plant, animal, object, or something intangible. The riddle sounded Cthulhu-esque at first, but it also tugged at a familiar image. Monkey? Veed guessed, a little unsure. Correct answer, the eagle said, and the door swung open. The next morning's breakfast was subdued after the flying class incident. No one was boasting about soaring over mountains anymore. Another rumor had spread among the first years instead. Didn't Harry Potter and Slytherin's Malfoy nearly come to blows in flying class? Someone whispered. Padma Patil leaned toward her neighbors with a conspiratorial smile. I heard Potter showed such talent that Professor McGonagall recommended him to join Gryffindor's Quidditch team. Padma always had good gossip. Her twin sister was in Gryffindor. Really? McGonagall? Everyone was shocked. Professor McGonagall was strict and fair, and she treated all houses equally. For her to do something exceptional for a first year seemed impossible. That's not possible, Terry said flatly. No first years joined the team in 100 years. That has to be a rumor. Maybe he's a reserve, Anthony offered. We did see him fly. He is fast and nimble. It would be mad to reject him, but he's a first year. He's never owned a broom before and doesn't know the rules. Being a reserve makes more sense. Kevin chimed in. If Potter had joined properly, the Weasleys would be shouting it from the rafters. Have you heard anything from them? Their logic made sense, and heads nodded. Padma stuck out her lip and whispered to Michael, Captain Wood wants to use Potter as a secret weapon. He's keeping it quiet. Those stupid boys are jealous. That's why they won't admit it. Michael didn't point out he was one of those boys. He grinned instead. Maybe they just don't want to admit they're not as good as another boy in front of a pretty girl. Padma's cheeks flushed. Vidi glanced over as Michael raised an eyebrow, suddenly roguish and confident, less like the shadowed boy he'd been before. Vidi felt a small, private relief. A commotion cut through the hall. 6 long-eared owls wheeled in, struggling under a slim package, and all eyes followed them. The owls circled and dropped the parcel at Harry Potter's place, then flapped off, leaving a scatter of feathers. Michael gasped, snatched Vidi's wrist, and hissed, A broom. I just know it's a flying broom. He looked almost green with envy. And a nimbus. Look at that packaging. I recognize it. Vede pried Michael's fingers off and set his hand back on the table, casual. Do well in flying class this afternoon, he said, and maybe you'll get noticed by the team too, and a new broom. Michael took the comment seriously, suddenly all focus. He bit into his lamb chop with renewed intensity. Soon it was time for flying class.